In this video, I'm going to share with you the 10 root causes of chronic pelvic pain and how you can address them. If you're a man or a woman suffering from chronic pelvic pain, pudendal neuralgia, nonbacterial prostatitis, or any of the mystery symptoms associated with CPPS, then this video is specifically for you. My name is Christian St. John. I spent nearly 3 years and over $50,000 to recover from chronic pelvic pain, so you don't have to. If you'd like to grab access to my free training on how I was able to recover from CPPS, be sure to go ahead and grab that below. The 10 root causes of CPPS that I'm about to share with you are the exact root causes that I uncovered throughout my healing process. These are the exact root causes that you must address in order to completely heal from chronic pelvic pain. And if you stick with me until the end of this video, I'm going to share with you why so many people struggle to address these root causes, as well as exactly what you can do to make sure that this doesn't happen to you. So let's jump in. I knew that I just couldn't give up on it. Completely healed, completely changed, totally transformed. Back at the gym, lifting weights, working out. Most importantly, I'm just living a normal life. You have to believe you can heal. Root cause number 1, muscle dysfunction and excess tension within the muscles. This was a major root cause that I had to address when I was struggling with chronic pelvic pain, and this is a big one if you're a man or a woman that's suffering with pelvic floor disorder. When the muscles of the pelvic floor are tight, like mine were for years, it could lead to a whole host of symptoms. Some symptoms that I had were extreme pain with sitting, a knife-style pain inside my urethra. Sometimes I would have electric shocks style pain, pain with urination, burning with urination. Some people have pain after urination, pain with sex, pain after sex. Some people experience rectal discomfort or rectal pain. The list goes on and on and on, but oftentimes a common root cause of these symptoms are tight and overly bound muscles of the pelvic floor. In my particular case, the muscles of my pelvic floor were in a low-level spasm for years. In fact, I didn't even realize it at first. It took quite a while for me to be aware of that. But they were just constantly tense and tight and spasming. Almost like if you could imagine music that's always on in the background, maybe on a low level, some piano music at a restaurant, but it just never shuts off. Well, after a while, that buildup of tension and that buildup of music in the body could culminate into spasming, which can culminate into significant pain that just doesn't go away. You may have been diagnosed with having a hypertonic pelvic floor. Hypertonic simply means excessive tone or tightening of the muscles of the pelvic floor. So what do you do about it? Well, one of the things not to do is to stretch too aggressively and to do intense stretching, especially if you're in severe pain. This can oftentimes put excess tension into the muscles of the pelvic floor and make things even worse for you. And for goodness sakes, if your physical therapist is recommending Kegels and you're having a hypertonic pelvic floor, don't do Kegels. Kegels are just going to make the situation worse. This was recommended for so many men and women, and it just put them in a really bad spot, flaring them up even worse. You want to actually do the opposite of that. You want to focus on routines that release tension from the muscles of the pelvic floor. And then eventually, once you become proficient in what you can do to release tension, you can work on power stretching, which can release tension from the prime movers and the various muscles of the lower body that are responsible for the muscles of the pelvic floor. Root cause number 2, nerve irritation. If you've ever experienced like a burning pain or a radiating pain inside the urethra or inside or around your perineum, this could be a sign of some sort of nerve irritation. And this was a symptom that I had for quite a while. This could also be a result of root cause number 1, which is having overly tight muscles of the pelvic floor. You see, there are very sensitive nerves within the penis of a male and the vagina of a female, and when these nerves are irritated, they can result in symptoms such as electric style pain, neuropathy, burning, pain with urination, pain with sex, pain after sex, and on and on and on. The challenge with these types of neuropathies is they cannot be addressed with standard pain medications such as ibuprofen. It works under a different pain pathway. So In my case, I had this constant burning, this constant radiating, and it would move around, inside and around the urethra. It would come and it would go. And oftentimes the tight muscles of the pelvic floor, if they're clamping down on those sensitive nerves, they can produce that unfortunate symptom. So what do you do about it? You want to specifically focus on exercises and stretches that are designed to calm the area around those nerves. So again, do not be too aggressive with your stretching because that could potentially irritate the nerves. You want to look into stretches such as nerve gliding, nerve flossing. Those are the types of stretches that can be helpful if you're having more of a neuropathy within your chronic pelvic pain. Another thing that you want to do is you want to definitely get checked out by your doctors to see if there's anything wrong with that particular nerve. Pudendal neuralgia is a common diagnosis that a lot of people receive within the pelvic floor community. So there are different ways to test whether or not that nerve is really inflamed or perhaps even entrapped in the worst case scenario. You can have your physician or a specialist order something called a nerve block. This is something that I had done and many people have done as well, where they can actually go in and inject using image guidance. They can inject along the nerve root of the pudendal nerve. It's called the Alcock's canal, to really see if it does respond to this type of medication. And that could be a good exclusion criteria to help you determine whether or not you do have pudendal neuralgia or whether you have an inflamed or an entrapped nerve. You can even go one step further like I did and have an MRI done to see, but the gold standard is actually something called an MRN. It's a magnetic resonance neuropathy, and this is where they can go in with very high-level cameras and take many pictures of the pudendal nerve to figure out whether or not there's actually damage to that area. Root cause number 3, chronic inflammation within the body. What do prostatitis, internal cystitis, urethritis all have in common? IS. Anything with is on the end of its name signals inflamed or inflammation. And in some cases, this can also include irritable bowel syndrome and even endometriosis, although that's more of a structural issue. But the bottom line here is it's excess inflammation which causes a lot of these conditions and symptoms, especially chronic pelvic pain. In fact, I recall situations on occasion where there might be a family function like a barbecue during the summer where I might want to have a beer, or if I was relaxing with friends and I would have a glass of wine or maybe just a beer at home, I would become almost instantly inflamed down below. Now, I'm being specific. This was a beer, one beer, not a 6-pack, not 12 beers over the course of a day, not binge drinking. We're just discussing having a beer, and I would feel maybe 20 minutes or half an hour later burning pain inside my urethra. I would have symptoms such as burning with urination, burning after urination, a raw, achy feeling inside the urethra that would last for hours or the entire day and just ruin the experience. It was so upsetting because here I just wanted to enjoy the day, relax, especially when you're suffering in pain. Maybe you want to kick back, and heaven forbid you want to have a glass of wine or a beer just to chill out and relax, and that would make my situation worse. Well, the reason for this is if you're already inflamed and you're already in a chronic pain state, now with alcohol, which is very acidic, you're adding more acid into your body. In this case, beer has purines, which are natural compounds, and when they enter the body takes those compounds and converts them into uric acid. So it was a direct conversion to more acid in my system, and this led to more suffering and more pain. Other folks have issues with caffeine. That's another one that can really trigger more pain. Processed foods, oils, seed oils or fried foods that are fried in inappropriate oils. The list goes on and on and on. And of course, excessive sugars, all sorts of junk that we put into our system can certainly exacerbate chronic pelvic pain. So what can you do about it? If you're suffering from chronic pelvic pain, you definitely want to have as many tests as you can done from your doctors to figure out which one of those conditions you actually have. But understand that most of those conditions fall under the umbrella of chronic inflammation. So the best thing that you can do is totally revamp your diet and focus on creating an anti-inflammatory diet. This is a diet that's going to cut out processed foods. You're going to cut out inappropriate oils. What do I mean by that? I'll just make it very simple for you. Just focus on the olive oils, the best quality olive oils, extra virgin olive oil when you can, avocado oil, the healthiest oils that you can use. The rest is pretty much junk for the most part. Butters, grass-fed butters, things like that. Keep it simple and keep it to a minimum. Certainly you want to get rid of any junk food. You want to get rid of as many sugars as you can. You want to get rid of any fried foods. In my case, I took 6 months off from caffeine. I think this is a good idea to allow your nervous system to calm down. So you may want to consider that. If you are addicted to caffeine, which most of the world is, you might be overdoing it, and people can be quite surprised once they actually start tracking how many milligrams of caffeine they're taking in per day. Oftentimes it's way more than they think, and caffeine is heavily addictive. Your diet should be rich in healthy omegas, and a lot of those oils and the butter that I shared with you will have those. And you want to incorporate as many vegetables as you can as well, especially as many leafy greens into your diet. I relied heavily on spinach and broccoli, which I still enjoy. So anything that's green and vibrant and leafy and organic, if you can afford to have that, always try to eat as many organic vegetables as you can to revamp your diet and reduce the amount of inflammation in your body. Root cause number 4, poor posture and structural imbalances. You know, it never ceases to amaze me how many people are walking around with terrible posture. You see people hunched over, slouched over, kind of curled over, whatever it is, especially here in the West, people just seem to have really poor posture. And anytime I see that, it's a reminder for me to put my shoulders back and make sure that I am correcting my posture, because it can have a really detrimental effect on the rest of the balance in your body. It could put things out of balance, especially with your hips. It could lead to your pelvis being out of balance, and this could lead to a whole cascade of ill effects that could potentially lead to chronic pelvic pain, or essentially not make it easy for you to recover from chronic pelvic pain. Other issues with poor posture can lead to a weak core. That can cause problems, especially if we're dealing with chronic pelvic pain. So I'm definitely not immune to this. I've had many sports injuries in my life. I've had surgeries to my knees, many abdominal hernia surgeries. I've had surgeries to my hips. All of this tends to culminate over years and decades, and it can result in chronic pelvic pain. So in my case, chronic pelvic pain is just the tip of the spear. There was a lot of things in my past, posture-wise and structurally, that may have contributed to my chronic pelvic pain. So what can you do about it? First thing is super easy. Just always make sure you're sitting up straight. Even as I'm speaking to you here, I'm a little hunched over because I'm trying to look to you here through the camera, but it's important to always sit up straight, right? When you're sitting down in a chair or anywhere on a bench, try to sit up straight. Don't slouch over. You can have a postural exam done through your doctor, your physical therapist. You can take a test and have them evaluate your posture to see how you might be struggling, or just ask a friend or family member to hold you accountable with your posture. You can perform a wall test. This is something very simple and free to do. This is where you're standing up against the wall with your back to the wall, and you have your heels to the wall, you have your butt to the wall, you have your back to the wall and your head to the wall. And if none of those areas are touching the wall, if they're actually moving forward, then that's showing you that you're struggling a little bit with your posture, and could be some areas of improvement there. Also, sometimes it can be very comfortable for people to sit with their legs crossed over. One leg might be crossed over the other, and people can sit like this for hours on end. That can sometimes create imbalances, especially around the pelvic region. So you want to be cognizant of that as you're sitting. Not only do you want to have your shoulders back, but you want to have some balance as you're sitting, to promote balance through the body and not really create any imbalances or posture disorders. And one of the biggest problems that I see in today's day and age are all these people walking around with tech necks. They're just staring down at their phones. Their shoulders are hunched. Their necks are cranked. They're looking down. It's the worst posture to be in. And what you're doing in this situation is you are training your body to be in a poor postural state, and this can wreak havoc on the balance within your body and can essentially create chronic pelvic pain or at the very least exacerbate the chronic pelvic pain that you're having. So get your shoulders back, and in this scenario, anytime you're looking at your phone, whether it's directions or a text message, get that phone up to eye level. I don't care if it feels weird, I don't care if it looks weird. When I am looking at my phone, it is at eye level, and if someone thinks you're taking a picture or a video of them, you can just say, hey, I'm just using my phone in the proper way. And if you're walking, looking at your phone, or you're in a group environment and you're looking at your phone and it's at eye level, and if someone thinks you're taking a picture of them or filming them, too bad, so be it. Your posture, your health, your pelvic health is way more important than what people think of you or what they might perceive of you that is not true anyway. Root cause number 5, urinary issues. People suffering with various urinary issues, whether it's self-imposed or an actual condition such as irritable bladder syndrome, can certainly contribute to chronic pelvic pain. So this is a tricky one because on the one hand, you want to make sure that you are well hydrated, but on the other hand, if you're overly hydrated and constantly running to the restroom, this can be a negative for your bladder and can contribute to prolonged symptoms. So you have to understand that having constant pressure on the bladder can contribute to pelvic floor symptoms. I've always been someone that was adequately hydrated, if not overhydrated. I'm very cognizant of how much water I am drinking each and every day. I do enjoy drinking coffee as well. And now that I'm healed from chronic pelvic pain, I am back to drinking coffee, only 1 coffee a day. But I do also understand that coffees and teas and drinks that have caffeine in them are diuretics. They pull water out of the body, which can contribute to frequency in urination. So this is one of the reasons why I decided to come off of coffee and come off of caffeine for 6 months when I was struggling with chronic pelvic pain. I really wanted to give my bladder a rest. Although you want to be well hydrated, you also want to be aware of anything that you might be doing within your diet that can be overly stimulating your bladder. You might want to consider going easy, again, on the inflammatory liquids such as coffees, teas, high sugar drinks such as juices, certainly sodas or anything like that. And this ties into creating an anti-inflammatory diet as we discussed earlier. Root cause number 6, gastrointestinal disorders. Many people struggle with constipation, gastrointestinal disorders, irritable bowel syndrome, and they also have chronic pelvic pain. So you have to also understand that if you're putting a lot of pressure on your bowels, this can put pressure on the muscles of the pelvic floor. So what can you do about it? Here are a couple tips. Number 1, you want to make sure again that your diet is in order, leaning into an anti-inflammatory diet, but you also want to focus on eating lots of foods that are rich in fiber so they can help you with your elimination and hopefully help you with your constipation. Another thing you want to be aware of is how you're actually eliminating. What is your posture like? Once again, posture is important, especially when you are eliminating. So are you hunched over when you're eliminating in the bathroom, or do you have a proper posture? I would recommend squatting, always squatting when you are eliminating. In the West, we've been trained to hunch, but squatting is actually healthier, and this is a natural elimination position for people that have grown up in the East. If you have trouble squatting, you can get something like a squatty potty. It's a device that makes it easier for you when you are eliminating. But you don't need to go out and purchase a squatty potty. You can use any stool or any type of little ledge or bench in the bathroom that can help you to get in an elevated position and can really help you to eliminate a little bit easier. Root cause number 7, hormonal imbalances and autoimmune issues. You know, many people out there are struggling with hormonal imbalances. This can sometimes lead to chronic pelvic pain. In fact, some studies suggest that having either low testosterone or low estrogen can contribute to chronic pelvic pain. In the case of women that are postmenopausal, studies have shown that having low estrogen can lead to a weakening of the muscles of the pelvic floor, which could lead to pelvic floor dysfunction and, of course, chronic pelvic pain. For men, there are many men walking around with low testosterone due to various reasons such as poor diet, lack of movement, lack of exercise, and of course, simply aging. Regarding autoimmune conditions, you have to understand that at the crux of autoimmune conditions is an excess of inflammation in the body. So if your body is overly inflamed to the point where you have a diagnosed autoimmune condition, and there are many out there, this can also unfortunately lead to chronic pelvic pain as a byproduct of that autoimmune condition. So what are some steps that you can take to combat some of this? Well, you might want to consider natural hormone balancing through a proper anti-inflammatory diet, through stress reduction, through sleep, and through supplementation with vitamin D and magnesium. If you want to take it to the next level, you also may want to consider getting your hormone levels checked and speaking with a licensed physician to see if there's anything else that you can do to make sure that your levels are balanced. Root cause number 8. Sexual trauma, or emotional injury. Have you experienced any trauma in your life, whether it be physical, emotional, or sexual? Do you have instances in your past that you just can't get out of your head that are constantly keeping you up at night? Are there emotional concerns that you have that have just been very difficult for you to get over and for you to process well into your adulthood? Well, if that's you, it can be the case where these repressed emotions can be contributing to your chronic pain and your chronic pelvic pain. You know, I think if you're a human and you're an adult that's gone through life, fact is you've experienced some ups and downs. There's no doubt about it. We all experience traumas as humans, and albeit some go through worse than others. So it's important to be able to process these emotions and process these traumas in a healthy way. And what I found is that many adults are just continuing to hold on to issues that they had through childhood or even adulthood, and they're unwilling to face them, and they're unable to process them and let them go in a healthy manner. So I think it's very important to focus on processing these emotions and look for ways that you can process these emotions either yourself, either with a therapist, to help you get some of these emotions out. Because studies have shown that trauma is held in the body, and trauma can lead to chronic pain and chronic pelvic pain. We recently worked with a client at Pelvic Heal that when he came on board with us initially, he shared with us that in the past, he lost 2 family members, actually 2 parents, within a very short period of time. Now, obviously, it's a very traumatic situation when that happens to anyone, whether it's the loss of loved ones, the loss of a parent, in this case, 2 parents, maybe a breakup, a divorce, or heaven forbid, the loss of a child. It's all terrible, but this particular situation really stood out in the mind of our coach and the coach that was helping this particular client. But it's not something that we pressed on because the client made it clear to us that it wasn't an issue, that it was something that he moved past, and that he really didn't think that it was affecting his chronic pelvic pain. However, it is something that we noted because it is a traumatic event. But we just put it in the back of our electronic file, if you will, to keep an eye on, to see if anything really would come up over the period of our coaching relationship with this client. But what's interesting is, as our coach and client relationship developed over time, we were able to help this client get their life back. And as his pelvic pain continued to reduce, as he was able to get back to normal function and all the athletics and the strength training and the exercise that he was doing previously, there was a point in his journey where we ultimately were able to identify that there was still some emotion and there was still some stuff that he was dealing with regard to those traumatic events that was holding him back from being 100% healed. And we were able to help him identify that some of those emotions were showing up in his body in a tense way, and they were translating to extra tension in his body and extra stress in his mind and tension in the body that was holding him back from becoming fully healed. So I think this is a very powerful lesson on multiple fronts. It shows that oftentimes what we think is fine or what we think we've actually addressed, we may not have fully addressed it. And those items can sometimes prevent us from healing faster, or they can prevent us from becoming fully healed from chronic pelvic pain. It also demonstrates that we can't always see things clearly when we're in the bottle, right? When you're stuck in the bottle, it's hard to see the label on the outside of the bottle. So sometimes you need a family member, a friend, a mentor, or a coach that's helping you see things from an outside perspective that's able to zoom out and help you view things in a different way and help you to understand maybe what your blind spots are in your life. So what can you do if you've suffered through traumas or stress or sexual trauma, or you have some unprocessed emotions that you're dealing with? What can you do to combat this? Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to have self-compassion. You want to be compassionate. Go easy on yourself. Give yourself some grace. Understand that you've been through some stuff, and don't be too hard on yourself. The last thing you want to do is beat yourself up when you're in a chronic pain situation and when you're dealing with chronic pelvic pain. You also want to make sure that you have proper body awareness. Where are you holding your emotions? Where are you holding your stress? Are you clenching your shoulders? Are you clenching the muscles of the pelvic floor, right? Are you just tight all through your core? How is your breathing? Are you breathing deeply? Are you taking diaphragmatic breaths? Or do you notice that if you're having memories of this trauma, that your breathing changes? Is it more shallow? So that is key. And then, of course, if you're dealing with serious emotional issues, I always recommend seeking the help of a licensed professional. We're not doctors, we're not therapists at Pelvic Heal, but through the relationship that we have with our clients as coaches, we can sometimes help them to identify where they might need to do some additional work. And this can oftentimes lead to a total resolution of chronic pelvic pain, if that is the underlying issue. Root cause number 9. Nervous system dysfunction. I feel that many men and women who are suffering from chronic pelvic pain are dealing with a nervous system that's dysfunctional. This is a major root cause when it comes to chronic pelvic pain, but unfortunately it's a root cause that's often misunderstood, and if it's even understood, oftentimes it's ignored, which can delay your healing. If your nervous system is dysregulated or dysfunctional, it essentially means that your nervous system is keeping you in a constant pain loop. It could be keeping you in a constant state of fight, flight, or freeze. No human is meant to endure chronic stress over a period of years and decades without any breaks. Unrelenting stress can lead to a dysregulated nervous system. 10,000 years ago, when we were out in the wild and we had to worry about catching our next meal, protecting our family, or escaping a predator like a lion, that can really lead you and put you into a fight, flight, or freeze mode during those scenarios. The difference is, at that time, once that really stressful situation dissipated, whether you escaped the wild animal, you're able to save your family, or fight off a predator, you then had a time to rest, and you maybe had days or even weeks where you could calm your nervous system. Well, in today's day and age, we're not necessarily trying to escape a lion, but our nervous system is being bombarded constantly, and it's chronic. That attack is now coming from social media, news, politics, advertisements, and it is just constant. In fact, studies have shown that we can be bombarded with tens of thousands of messages and advertisements per day. This keeps us on high alert, and it really tends to disrupt our attention spans and can disrupt our nervous system. Those pain patterns that are learned over time can become stuck and can lead to a dysregulated nervous system, ultimately keeping you into chronic pelvic pain for way longer than you need to be. So if you're dealing with a dysregulated nervous system, and if that's the root cause of your chronic pelvic pain, what are some things that you can do about it? Well, I recommend focusing and learning activities and skills that would help to calm your nervous system. You might want to look into some skills such as vagus nerve activation. You might want to look into calming your nervous system with either hot or cold exposure therapy. For me, I really enjoy hot steam baths, whether it's at a spa or just in my bathtub at home, maybe an Epsom salt bath, and then I will contrast that with an ice plunge, or if I'm at home, with a cold shower, and that tends to work really well. You really want to focus on calming the pain systems and soothing your nervous system, taking deep diaphragmatic breaths and focusing on your breath. Root cause number 10, neuroplasticity gone wrong. Neuroplasticity is a great thing. Unfortunately, it's a really bad thing when it comes to chronic pelvic pain. Essentially what neuroplasticity is, it's your brain's ability to adapt and formulate new connections. Whenever you're learning, whenever you're growing, neuroplasticity is what allows you to learn new skills and allows you to learn new tasks such as driving, or maybe even learning a language or learning how to play guitar. It's been said that nerve cells that fire together wire together. The problem is it can also go awry, and when you have an injury or a triggering event, let's say you suffer an injury that may cause pain to the pelvic floor, over time, when that acute pain becomes chronic, this is an example of the brain training yourself and training your body to be in pain even when there's no remaining tissue damage. So what can often happen is, over a period of months and years, the brain has learned pain, and it's creating new maps, and it's taking over more inventory in the pain centers of the brain, and it's taking this acute pain that you had initially and it's turning it into chronic pain. Then when you add all the other factors that we discussed earlier, such as emotions and maybe some of the biological conditions that we discussed, it just becomes a very dangerous cocktail, and it makes it a lot harder to get out of chronic pelvic pain. In my case, I began to uncover that neuroplasticity was running wild and my pelvic pain was expanding through the neural networks of my brain. As an example, I had so much pain with sitting for months and months and months, and over a year, even I couldn't even sit. Now, when you think about it, there really is no rhyme or reason why someone shouldn't be able to sit. People have been sitting for thousands of years with no issue. Well, my brain had learned this pain from whatever my triggering event was, and it had grabbed onto that pain signal, and it had created a more vicious pain signal and a pain loop. So anytime I would sit, it would fire up pain in my urethra. It would give me knife pain or burning or neuropathy. In fact, it became so bad that sometimes just thinking of sitting or imagining sitting would start up the pain. And this was a telltale sign that neuroplasticity was going wrong for me, and I was headed in the wrong direction. So if you're having scenarios where chronic stress is causing pain, or you're having emotional situations that are causing pain, or maybe even just visualizing activities cause pain, like in my case, this could be a telltale sign that neuroplasticity is at work in your chronic pelvic pain, and it's at the root cause of your chronic pelvic pain. So what can you do about it? Well, the great news is, just as pain can be learned, it can also be unlearned. And there are some amazing techniques and skills that you can learn to eventually unlearn the pain and take back that real estate in the brain that's been now dedicated to chronic pelvic pain. One technique is visualization. This is one of my favorite techniques. You can visualize yourself pain-free. You can visualize yourself free from chronic pelvic pain. You can really feel that through some of these visualizations that we do and that we teach. And then over time, what that can do is that can allow your brain to understand that there's nothing physically wrong, and it can begin to communicate through your nervous system with the rest of your body that everything's okay. Another technique that you can perform is something called graded exposure therapy. When I was struggling with sitting, after a period of time, I had to train my brain that sitting was okay and that there's nothing wrong with sitting, as I'm doing right now. 2 years ago, I couldn't even sit for 2 seconds, never mind record this lengthy video for you. Now, did I just go from immediately sitting and being in excruciating pain to sitting for hours, or being on a 12-hour plane ride with no pain? Did that just happen like that? No. I had to use a graded exposure therapy approach, which means little by little, I would take 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes in a seated position, sometimes on a hard chair with no cushioning or a bench, in an uncomfortable position, and I had to physically train my brain and the rest of my body that it was okay and natural to sit and nothing was wrong. And over time, what I found is that the pain began to diminish, and it became less and less frequent. But it happens gradually over time. Another technique that can be very helpful is what's known as affirmations or positive self-talk or mantras, whatever you want to call it. We have a very specific way of approaching this at Pelvic Heal, but essentially the crux of it is you want to have some really great programs that you're repeating back to yourself over and over again. And through this repetition of this positive self-talk, you're beginning to reprogram your brain and teach your brain that everything's okay, there's nothing physically wrong with you, and that you're safe. And over time, through repetition and through consistent action, your brain can begin to actually unlearn this chronic pelvic pain. Now that you've learned the 10 root causes of chronic pelvic pain, I want to explain why so many people struggle to address these root causes, ultimately delaying their healing. One major reason why people struggle to address these root causes is that it's very overwhelming. We just laid out 10 distinct root causes for you that can be contributing to your chronic pelvic pain. The reality is, even just focusing on one or two of those, it could take you months or even a year or longer to master them. It takes time to really investigate what's going on, get under the hood, and then learn the skills, and then put the skills into practice in order to actually resolve that root issue. So people often do feel overwhelmed. The best suggestion I can give you here is to try not to tackle all 10 at once. What you want to do is pick the one or two or maybe even three at most that you feel most likely resonate with you, and just focus on those 2 or 3 root causes. You can get to the other 7 in time, but go start with the highest priorities first and work on those. But you need to be consistent and persistent in order to really get to the root of what's going on with your chronic pelvic pain. So because it can be overwhelming to attack all of this on your own, consider getting an accountability partner, a friend, a family member, or someone that can help hold you accountable, maybe even hire a coach to really have an outside perspective and allow you to zoom out to see what might be going on and what might be at the root of your chronic pelvic pain. Sometimes when you're so zoomed in on your day-to-day life, you tend to think that these are the root causes, but you may have some blind spots, just like that client we discussed a little bit earlier, who had some traumas in his life and initially thought that it was no issue and had nothing to do with his chronic pelvic pain, but eventually through some work together, we were able to help him determine that in actuality, it is something that needs to be addressed. Another reason why people fail to address the root causes of their chronic pelvic pain is that they're too focused on just one area, and usually it's just the physical. You may have noticed in the list of 10 root causes that I gave you, I put most of the physical causes up front because they are the most common, and those are the causes that most people tend to focus on. When in actuality, root cause number 8, number 9, and number 10 are typically the underlying root causes for chronic pelvic pain when men and women are suffering for 3 to 6 months with no known structural disorder, no infection, no diagnosis, no disease. Then the reality is that numbers 8, 9, and 10 that I just shared with you should probably be the ones that you attack first if you're in that category. But it is human nature to always think that this is a physical issue. It is human nature to think that there's must be something wrong with you. Maybe you have a disease, maybe you have an infection. I'm not saying to dismiss that. It's very important to go through the paces and turn over as many rocks as you can in the beginning. But if you've been sitting here for months or years or even decades with chronic pelvic pain, and you've done all of the physical, there is a possibility that it might be more of the emotional, it might be more of the psychological, it could be more of the nervous system gone wrong or neuroplasticity gone wrong, and I would highly recommend that you focus on those. Another reason why most people fail to heal from chronic pelvic pain is because they either don't understand or they're unwilling to accept that healing requires a multi-dimensional approach. It is not just a one-off treatment or a magic bullet or a silver bullet approach that will resolve your chronic pelvic pain. This is why we designed our pain recycling system to address your chronic pelvic pain in this specific way by utilizing the biopsychosocial model that is the most effective way to recover from chronic pelvic pain. Another reason why most people fail to heal from chronic pelvic pain is because they're on Google University or they're in the forums just like I was, and they're searching for answers and they're getting a lot of contradictory information. So what happens is you wind up wasting a lot of time. And the reality is when you're working with contradictory information and you're listening to people that have not recovered from chronic pelvic pain and you're just in an ecosystem of suffering, that's what I call it, when 95% of these people in the forums are as bad or worse than you are and they're looking for answers, that tends to lend itself to more anxiety and more fear and more pain, and that pain cycle continues. It's really not a good space to be in. Most people don't understand that healing takes consistency, it takes daily practice, and even if you are able to get some good tips here or there, how do you know if it's working or not if you don't have anyone to hold you accountable? It does take time. It could take weeks or even months performing certain activities and learning certain skills in order to gauge if you're having progress. One of the challenges that I had when I was trying to put together my system was I was just testing everything. I was in the laboratory testing to see if this worked or if that worked, and that takes time. Unless you're willing to take years or a decade to figure it out on your own, you might want to consider bringing on a coach or an accountability partner that can help you get there faster and compress that time and compress that suffering. And even if you're the type of person that tends to buy into the fact that there could be a mind-body connection, or there could be a nervous system connection, or there could be a neuroplasticity connection, even the most positive, open-minded person that begins to understand that, it's going to take time for you to really get that and really wire that into your nervous system. We've actually seen that with some of our clients where they're understanding the concepts, but it isn't until we're able to work with them side by side and walk them through this process and be there to guide them and make sure they're learning the skills and performing the activities. It's not until we're able to do that with them that they're able to actually get it. And that also takes time. So you don't just read a book or take an online course or do anything like that and then change overnight. Remember, it's not about the information, it's about the implementation of that information. And the reality is most people, when they're suffering and struggling and in pain, just don't have the endurance to go through it on their own. So what happens is most people try to do it alone and they're isolated. For me, I was essentially in my house. I wouldn't leave the house. I was in sweatpants, curled up in the fetal position. I didn't want to see my friends. I didn't want to see my family. I was becoming a hermit. I had a beard. You wouldn't even recognize me. My hair was growing in all sorts of crazy ways where it could grow at least. And this becomes very depressing. So you need a team around you to advance your healing, and that's the most constructive way to do that. And being in isolation and being alone makes it very difficult to heal on your own. And what we found is that the people who heal the fastest are the people who have guidance, support, community, and accountability. And this is exactly what we provide at Pelvic Heal. So if you've watched this video all the way until now, and if you feel like some or all of these root causes may pertain to you, here's what I'd like you to do. Go ahead and rewatch this video 10 times, 100 times, 500 times if you have to, over the course of your healing. You have to wire this into your nervous system and wire this into your brain. It isn't until you really truly accept these root causes and go to work on them that you can have complete freedom from chronic pelvic pain. And be sure to let us know what you like the most about this video and what else you'd like to see on our channel so we can best serve you. And if you'd like to learn more about my struggles with chronic pelvic pain, my story, and ultimately how I was able to recover from chronic pelvic pain, be sure to go ahead and watch this next video that's coming up on the screen right here.